We have to wrap up pretty soon, so we'll only be able to have a reasonably short chat. So, Paul, we'll just get through a couple of ideas. Paul, at the start of your talk, and I think this is something that all of you can talk about, is when we're talking about, really powerful collaborations and blurred boundaries in this issue. But you said you have to learn to understand the context that you operate in. So whether it's with children or with education in government or with entrepreneurs, young people, whoever it happens to be, how and why is this key, Paul?
Someone was talking about it earlier today, but actually every context is different, and going in there and understanding and really getting that feel is fundamental to fine-tuning what it is that you do in that space. That seems very clear to me, and certainly from whenever I've been working in this, I think that's true. I mean, almost every school that comes into the programme I visit, which is kind of crazy because I just visit hundreds of schools, but everyone is different.
Mm-hmm. And so therefore you have to embed yourself within that process.
Absolutely.
The teachers have to do it in order for you to be able to make the change that you want. And Alison, you were talking about this as well. It's all about storytelling, no matter what the project happens to be, whether it's in community or for a private developer. Getting to really know the context is absolutely pivotal. Even bringing the developers to go and sleep on site.
Yeah, it's the vibe, man. It's the vibe. It's Marbo. It's the vibe. No, but it is. And it's totally true, because it's also what it's about having that indeterminate process that Theaster Gates was talking about as well. That and for me, I think one of the things that I've gleaned from all of these talks, especially yours as well, Jesper, is at which point do you enter the decision-making process, and I think that you can go into, if you make the decisions before you go to the school, if you make the decisions before you camp in the place, if you make the decision at the policy level before it ever, reaches the end users, then you've missed the point, really.
How does that work for you, Jesper, in a really practical level? And I know you talked about it during your talk as well, but exactly what Alison's saying, you have to be able to be flexible throughout that process.
Right, and I think, so one of the things we always, or almost always experience, is that the civil servants will come at us with a solution.
Before you've even started?
Yeah, because, for example, they will say, well, we heard about this empowerment. We should do some of that. Or we heard about this mentorship thing. We should help us implement that into whatever else we're doing. And obviously, so we see that as an opportunity. And well, okay, let's go with that idea. And we see it as a prototype-ish thing, but we test that out with the concept that how they can describe it. And that is basically just starting at the end of the circle that I presented, saying, well, we start by having a product, but then we actually enable a process of rediscovering, what is the actual need. The empowerment might be one, part of the concept solution in the end, but it's really just an invitation for us to challenge their hypothesis.
And how does that work in practice? I mean, really, I have this vision of public servants being dragged kicking and screaming into this new world where you're forced to do mandatory internships and things like that.
Can I just say, and I met quite a bunch of lovely civil servants here, and I think you took in a lot of bashing these past few days.
I've been a civil servant for a long time, so I understand.
But that being said, I actually think, at least in the Danish context, it's the opposite. We have a lot of colleagues. I have a lot of colleagues in the different ministries that are frustrated. They don't feel that they're the right circumstances or the right premises to do that job, whether it's not enough time to research the issues when the political negotiations are going on, or whether it's other kinds of restrictions from their manager. Especially the middle managers are really squeezed in between, delivering interesting, good projects, as well as having a top manager that sort of requires different things. So I think we just have to have a little bit of understanding of their user experience as well. But that being said, It's certainly a huge barrier for some civil servants to be told that now you have to spend a week in a job center, and you're being confronted with families that have been on unemployment services for 25 years and confronted with that experience. So yeah.
But it completely changes and challenges their thinking, and then the end result is a better product for them as an employee or a worker, but also for the end user.
Yeah, well, for me, it's just about creating that active relationship or that sort of reactivation of connecting to the public as a public servant.
Empathy.
And empathy, because it's about, for me, it's also about the knowledge you have when you make the decision. So with that knowledge, the civil servant is actually capable of challenging the minister in a different way than they're used to as well.
Do you feel like, I mean, you've heard everybody speaking today, Leo, do you feel a connection? I mean, you said Alison was an entrepreneur as well, which is great. I want you to call me an entrepreneur. I need to tell you what I've been doing later, over a drink. But, you know, even hearing Jesper speaking about sort of transforming the civil service or something like that, adopting almost entrepreneurial acts in some ways in the public service, how will that help, I suppose?
Well, I think as with the social impact bond, it creates a whole different dynamics. Whereas usually they would say, okay, you get 100 youngsters, do something good with them. It wouldn't really be matched and followed up, like measured in the right way. So the experiments Jesper talked about, they don't really take place. It's all single-pointed actions. They don't really enter into the real realm of these kids that sometimes have seen like 80 of these helpers, official people, from their 15th year onwards. So you really need to create a different lifestyle in their way. So that's what I loved about Paul and the way he's going about this, like super professionally and at such an early age. I hope that will help for them to never reach the business club because they're already being entrepreneurial and going for it.
We've only got a couple of minutes, unfortunately. I was just trying to think of something that connects, and it's something, Paul, that you said earlier, and kind of actually you brought it up as well, is this, you've been saying if you've got a great idea, start a company, just do it. But what if you don't have an idea yet? And what if you're marginalised in some kind of ways? How to support or to encourage those sorts of all of us who may not necessarily be the gung-ho one company entrepreneur, how to make that happen, and how will that enable a sort of, I suppose, a better, more creative society? Alison?
Oh, I'd love to speak to this because I think, you know, I'm a massive advocate for leadership development, you know, because I think in what Charles was saying about the City 3.0, we're all empowered creators. But it's not leadership leadership is also overrated. You know, we all can't be leaders, like otherwise nothing will get done. We'll all be like, what about my idea? You know, and so we have to know when to follow. And that's why I'm actually really interested in followership as well and when to follow. Because right now I am super, you know, excited about a really good friend of mine's project, and I have said, I will give you 5 years for your project because I just think it's amazing, you know? And so I am dedicating myself to his project. And, you know, I just think, you know, get passionate because that is leadership. It's still, and we said on the couch yesterday, all of those leaders, they were like, oh, we're not leaders, they're leaders. And other people followed them, you know, but they're humble. But, you know, but the first follower, the second follower, the third follower, they're all leaders.
Paul?
I think that I understand about the followership and I completely get that, but we actually need far more leaders. And I think the statistics that you were giving about the smaller and smaller companies is kind of reinforcing that notion that leadership in large quantities is key. And then the issue is that lots of people don't have it. But if you went through those stages that I talked about, which is that you first of all got to engage them to make them think this might be interesting, you've then got to teach them to have a voice. And for loads of people, that's much, much harder than you imagine. And then you've got to empower them. You've got to give them responsibility. You can't expect them to take responsibility unless you give them responsibility. And then what you get is transformation.
Final word, Jesper?
No, I agree. And I guess my point about sort of just voicing that it was like this sort of the unvoiced ideas or the people that are, even when you ask them, so what would you like from government? And they won't be able to give an answer. It's not only the marginalized, vulnerable people, it's sometimes also the caseworkers that are pressured from time schedules or whatever. So I agree on the fact that sort of embedding a more creative thought, inspired way of people, even as a caseworker, you are also a leader in a way where you sometimes can sort of voice or imagine your own situation in a new light. And I think right now caseworkers are not letting themselves do that. So in that sense, I'm totally agreeing on the education part of that.
I really like that notion of the unvoiced and go. And I think my core message is you're never going to get anywhere unless you give the unvoiced a voice as a community and a place.
Yeah, that is a wonderful way to wrap up our brief chat today. My gosh, I'm so inspired by these guys. So thank you so much to Paul, Alison, Jesper and Leo. Thank you. You guys are great.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Fenella, for moderating today, and thank you to all of our speakers. That was really wonderful afternoon. We are again in the home stretch. For those of you I promised would be out by 5, it'll be ish. We'll keep it to time as much as we can. We've got a few more things to wrap up, but we won't be long. I'm going to invite Charles Landry back to the stage to give us a bit of a wrap up.
Thank you very much. You're all great. So are you. There were some themes and threads, and I just want to point out a few threads. And one of the threads was about the constant and the uncertain. And the only thing that was constantly uncertain was the clicker. And the dreaded clicker was actually a message, probably from the heavens, about what life is actually like. So that sort of reflects to me the complexity of what we were really talking about. But basically, obviously, we've sort of explored, experienced and exchanged about a changing world unfolding, and it's really wonderful. I think looking at this from a sort of helicopter point of view, which is why I give congratulations to Form and others, is you can see, I could feel that emerging world unfolding as one presentation after the other gave a different angle on the same world that is just being shaped up at this moment. And I think that in times of sort of rapid transformation, there can be a sort of giddy headiness that makes you slightly feel uncertain, but at the same time it can be liberating. And that feeling of liberation is partly what I think I felt over the last couple of days before those contours of the new sort of encapsulate more firmly. And clearly, I think we've already said what that is. There is less linear thinking. There is less rigidity. There's less premature, I was about to say ejaculation, I didn't mean that, prejudgment. There is less closing in too quickly. There is more openness for as long as it takes. There's more believing in the unleashing of the potential of people. There's more of a startup culture. There's more the self being a learning resource, as Paul said. There's more relaxing into ambiguity, and there's more understanding that the seemingly illogical is actually logical when you look at it from a higher plane, and the paradoxes that seem there are not really paradoxes at all, because, for example, the culture of giving away is one of the best ways of actually making money, giving away for free. So how does this all then fit together? And I think one of the interesting things is to think of this in terms of being strategically principled. We know it's all a bit flexible, but we roughly know the journey of travel whilst being tactically flexible. So strategically principled and tactically flexible is probably this quality that would make this unfolding world potentially exhilarating, which would have certain qualities like civic creativity, where the privates would be doing their thing, but somehow it would enter into the public good, and the public would be more entrepreneurial within the principles of equity and accountability. And from that, I believe that iterative process would generate the civic generosity I spoke to yesterday. And that, of course, can only happen with this reinvigorated democracy that many have talked about. And so that bureaucracy, that democracy, those actors outside would then generate those conditions that many have talked about: platforms, devices, incentives, rules or non-rules, that would create the conditions for us to think, plan and act with imagination to create that world. And this city would probably feel different from a sensory perspective if we took that into account, because we understand that the city communicates through every fibre of its being, as Alison said, and when it communicates ugliness, it entrenches us and makes us go inward. And of course, when it does the opposite, and we can argue what beauty is, it sort of opens us out in some sort of way. And so this is a slightly different world. It looks and feels and is navigated differently. Its operating dynamics are different. Its planning modes are different. And many things are inverted. So when you talked about, Jesper, the map and the territory, the map sort of leads you to the road map. It's inverted. We look more at the territory from which at some moment the map may emerge, which is really what Hyasta was talking about in my view, or that's what I thought he was talking about. So I think, finally, you'll be pleased, finally, she loves the word finally. Sorry, no, you're lovely. Sorry.
I'm the queen of time, though.
The question is, that also needs to be inverted, is, it's not what is the value of all of this stuff. Not what is the value of design. What's the value of those people? What's the value of you? What's the evidence that for 35 years I've been forced to give, and I never, ever do it anymore? I say instead, what's the cost of you not doing this? And that really, for me, was my personal liberation. And in the end, if one was to give the ultimate summary, these places we're talking about would have 5 qualities. There'd be places of anchorage, the familiar, that roots us, memory, all of those things, the familiar, family, whatever, heritage. There'd be places of possibility, choice, options, can do. There'd be places of connection, here, there, everywhere. There'd be places of self-improvement, learning and so on. Obviously the new learning like Paul talks about. And finally, there'd probably be places of inspiration. Thanks.